including the SARS virus and coronaviruses. And there are some beliefs that this being just miles away, I believe 20 miles away from where this epidemic supposedly started, that virus escaped from that lab, which is a possibility. Now, I think at the same time, and this is probably the one that I would go with more than anything else. And I saw this earlier. Again, you have to consider, I believe, without getting carried away and going into loony bin territory and just putting out there every conspiracy that seems to fit and even some that don't, you still have to consider the players behind the scenes and what they want. And I do think it's twofold. I think, number one, they want as many people vaccinated as possible. And if time allows, I will get into that, but I'll just throw that out there. But number two, and maybe above and beyond all of that, they always want chaos. They always want confusion. They always want panic. And these being the Kenites tares and the globalists around the world, the Zionists, whatever you want to call them, whatever fits your definition or your belief system, they always want chaos. And then they always want to bring order out of chaos or order from chaos. They want to try to cause as much societal panic and economic panic as they possibly can. And you look at what's been going on between the United States and China, these tariffs, these trade wars, these tariffs back and forth. I know we signed a supposed phase 1 deal with China, but we've been going back and forth with China and trying to put pressure on them and they on us almost since Trump has been elected, certainly. And I saw this. It comes from I saw it from coercioncode.com, and I'll admit I am not familiar with coercioncode.com, and I wasn't. You can go there, and I'll post what I referenced from there on the American Faith Today Facebook page. They are really playing up the panic, though. I will say that much. But this also actually originally came from a site called State of the Nation. A complex psyop perpetrated to distract, to enforce mandatory vaccinations, and coerce China to comply with American demands. Wuhan coronavirus pandemic bioengineered. Everything points to biowarfare being used against China by the Western power to contain her growing power and influence in the world. Given the multiple and serious woes that China has suffered from during 2019, it comes as no surprise that the Western powers would now resort to bioweaponry. If there's one last hit to the economy that China doesn't need right now, it's a global pandemic that supposedly originated in Wuhan, the sprawling capital of central China's Hubei province. And they have a map here. This, by the way, I did see maybe in this article, maybe elsewhere, they're claiming that this is spread to 29 out of China's 31 provinces. So they're claiming anyway that this has basically now affected the entire nation, essentially, of China. Wuhan is located right in the center of China's highly productive southeast region, the economic powerhouse of the nation. This strategic location was selected for the biological attack because of the easily engineered vectors of disease dissemination as depicted by a map that they have. Paralyzing China's economic and financial sectors is, after all, a primary goal of this essentially Anglo-American black operation. And they have an article or link why the coronavirus is a real threat to China's economy. But keep in mind, too, with economies interconnected and globalized, and with the stock market reacting to every little thing, an economic crash in China would not exactly be beneficial to the rest of the world either. But it would allow, and again, I'm just I'm trying to connect the dots. It would allow for that chaos. It would allow for that panic. And it would allow for, at some point down the road, whenever it would occur, whenever they could implement it, a global solution and alternative. In light of the U.S. staged Hong Kong protest, U.S. tariff regime against China, threat of economic sanctions against nations working with Huawei, the cell phone company or manufacturer, CIA-inflamed conflict involving the Muslims in China, provocative sailing of U.S. Navy warships through the Taiwan Strait, transparent political prosecution of Huawei's CFO, ravaging of China's pig farms by a bioengineered virus, etc., the Chinese government has been under withering attack since 2018. It goes on to talk about, it references SARS and says the SARS outbreak that occurred from 2002 to 2003 has already shown that China is not willing to release the hard scientific evidence that proves a premeditated release of a bioengineered coronavirus. There's actually a reference to a Wikipedia article in which a Russian scientist publicized his claim that the SARS coronavirus was a synthesis of measles and mumps that could not be formed in the natural world and thus must have been produced under laboratory conditions. Another Russian scientist had commented that the SARS virus was probably man-made. There are people who say that that's not the case because the SARS virus is a coronavirus. Measles and mumps are paramoxyviruses, different structures, different methods of infection, and thus it wouldn't seem all that likely for a coronavirus to have been created from two paramoxyviruses. But, again, just everything that's been going on and everything that is, again, that I think we could say is their goal, it would fit. And again, I'm don't want to get myself off track here. I'm just always mindful of the time, and I'm scrolling through this article and so on and so forth. So there's always a fine line to walk, even with that. It says, time will tell whether this deadly coronavirus was released into the Chinese population with the intent to kill and sicken, scare, and intimidate. Also referencing the Hong Kong protests. By the way, again, just an idea, or just to point out once again that we are probably involved with these Hong Kong protests. There's certainly a belief that we are. That they started, that they're being controlled or at least funded by, I forget if it's called the National Endowment for Democracy, an American organization. But what these Hong Kong protesters did, from the DailyMail.com, pretty much shows once again that these are not peaceful people, that these are people there to agitate, to cause chaos, that basically you could almost say are committing acts of terrorism, certainly acts of chaos. And so to think that it's just about freedom and rights and government oppression, not when they're throwing Molotov cocktails at empty housing complexes. Now, fortunately, we can say they were empty housing complexes, but the reason why they did it is Hong Kong had earmarked or eyed this housing complex as a quarantine zone for patients who have or have been diagnosed or expected to have coronavirus. And these protesters in Hong Kong hurled Molotov cocktails at, and from what I understand, some of the residents weren't too pleased about the idea either, but hurled Molotov cocktails at what they were planning to have a quarantine zone for coronavirus patients. Those plans have now been scuttled. I don't think it says that the structure or building was entirely destroyed, but with what happened, they're no longer looking to do that. But again, something is off there, because just basic human compassion, that you would want these people cared for, you would want these people to receive, and believe me, I'm somebody, and probably a lot of you as well, are people who aren't exactly fans of big pharma and the mainstream medical science community and treatments and so forth. But that said, you would basically want people to receive the best care that they possibly could, seemingly. And certainly if they do have the infection, if they do have the virus, and if it's as bad as they want everyone to believe, then you would want that kind of quarantined and sequestered off and not spreading it to the general population. And so, like I said, something is definitely off there. Getting back to this article, though, it says, why China? The $64,000 question is, why is China always the epicenter for so many strains and variations of coronaviruses, influenzas, pneumonia viruses, and other highly contagious infection agents that strike the major commercial centers on southeastern mainland? And it references something here from the Drudge Report with some of their big scaremongering headlines. Outbreak overwhelms 40 million quarantined, spread through eyes, which they did quarantine the entire city of Wuhan at this point. Case in Chicago, 22 states on alert, Europe hit. So they basically are telling this, at least, or claiming that this is quickly going global. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that will connect with a story that I have here as well, or a couple of them. It goes on to say there are several main pillars of this New World Order agenda, which again, they I believe correctly say, foist a one world government on the world community of nations. That is their end goal. One of which is stealthily being put into place by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Likewise, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook, are slowly erecting one of the primary social media pillars, as is Tony Dorsey at Twitter and Susan Wojcicki at YouTube. Bill and Hillary Clinton are using the Clinton Foundation to take advantage of poor countries around the world, while laying the foundation for further exploitation on a mass scale, just as George Soros and Sons are deceitfully creating new societies via geoengineered climate change, multiculturalism, and cultural Marxism. The crucial point is that all these high-paid globalists are intimately connected to each other and covertly working to advance the same nation-destroying UN agendas. And they reference Jeffrey Epstein, a link to that. Jeffrey Epstein, he was connected to Bill Gates, he was connected to the Clintons, but don't forget, he was also connected to Donald Trump as well. Fabricating global crises is at the very core of these various NWO sub-agendas. Two of the scariest manufactured catastrophes are those that severely impact the biosphere, like global warming, and undermine human health, like deadly pandemics. In this way, false pretexts are being cunningly constructed to justify the establishment of an all-powerful one-world government, which I will add eventually would be led by Antichrist, at which point it would also become a worldwide religious government, kind of a theocracy, but obviously a very false one. And again, it goes on to mention these various people with their sundry connections and interconnections. Bill and Melinda Gates are very big into a worldwide super vaccination agenda where every single person is vaccinated every year on time and microchipped accordingly. And again, I'm not going to get so much into the microchip as far as, no, it's not the mark of the beast, but it is a way, if and when it would be implanted in people to keep track of them, to trace their movements. Of course, we already